All right. Welcome everyone to the August convening of the Philanthropy Club of Illinois and happy Black Philanthropy Month. Please use the chat to introduce yourselves and your organizations. If your organization has any career opportunities or upcoming events, feel free to share that information as well. And should you have any questions or comments as we go along, please also feel free to drop those in the chat. I am Jessica Harris, and I have the pleasure of serving as co-lead moderator for the Philanthropy Club. And I'm joined today by Kate Spellman, who is my co-lead, who will be monitoring the chat. For those who are returning Phi Clubbers, welcome back. For those who this may be your first time joining us, let me share just a little bit more about this group. The Philanthropy Club of Illinois was founded over 20 years ago by Gus Wilhelmi, who some of you may know as the founder of the Safer Foundation. It is 100% volunteer driven. So we all do this as a bonus to our day-to-day lives. And we offer no cost monthly programming to provide nonprofits both access to funders and technical skill building for effective fundraising. You should know that Phi Club is sponsored by Forefront. And so, as always, we want to thank our special Forefront staff partners, Susie Lee and Emily Long, who work tirelessly behind the scenes to ensure we have seamless programming. If someone forwarded you the invite today to this session and you would like to receive notifications directly from Phi Club and join our newsletter, feel free to sign up using the chat in the link. Kate or Susie will drop that for me in the chat so that you have the information. And be sure to check the box that says Philanthropy Club. Okay? Now that we've gotten all the housekeeping out of the way, let's get to today's topic. If you joined our March session earlier this year, you may recall Liz Thompson, who was one of our featured guests that month. She mentioned the concept of the kitchen cabinet, which in turn reminded me of Michelle Obama sharing about her kitchen table in her book, The Light We Carry. In both cases, they're more metaphorically referring to the trusted colleagues, peers, friends who shape our personal and professional lives. And I'm just so thrilled to be joined by two people who are a part of my kitchen table. We may not sit down for dinner every night, but they are a part of my extended family by choice. And whenever we need anything from each other, we are always there. And so I like to welcome to the virtual space, and please join me in doing so, Whitney Wade, who is Program Officer at MacArthur Foundation, and Channing Leonard, who is Senior Program Officer at Polk Brothers Foundation. Snaps, claps, hearts, whatever you do in the virtual space, wave. Thank you all for being here. All right, well, we're going to do something a little differently this month. Rather than reading their bios or having them go through more introductions about themselves, I'm going to do a quick round of what I'm calling Getting to Know You for the Culture Edition, because, like I said, it is Black Philanthropy Month. All right, so Channing and Whitney, President Obama recently dropped his summer playlist. What's one song that you currently have in heavy rotation?
I
Or
looked at it
summer
once.
favorite?
I looked at it once. I like that he always puts some old school songs on there as well. Um,
Yes,
I think he had some reggae stuff on there. I don't think reggae gets enough love, so I'm gonna go with that.
love it.
Interestingly, Roy Ayers' Sunshine is always on
Mm,
my playlist when it's warm outside. I think my phone knows that that's what I'm looking for when the weather changes.
yes, yes, I love that. I recently got to see the Buena Vista Social Club musical on Broadway, and I was thrilled to see their song on his list. So that's definitely in my rotation right now, coming off of the play. Um, so
It's a great.
another summer thing. Just nothing compares to summertime shy. I'm
That's
sorry
right.
for folks who may be from other places. It is something special about summertime shy. What's something you all look forward to doing here every year? A festival or a concert or a gathering of sorts? What's one of your favorites in summertime shy?
I'm actually looking forward to going to Rainbow Cone.
Yes.
And because there's now a location downtown, which is very problematic because it's next to um Nutella and what is that? Garrett's and
Oh,
Cinnabon, it is like they just really went overboard with putting those things together. But I like to go to Rainbow Cone every year in the summer. I usually go to the location that's on Western, but now that there is one downtown, I feel obligated to try that one as well.
Yeah, Whitney, are you a traditional rainbow cone girl or are you tasting other things?
I usually just get black walnut because an
Okay,
actual rainbow cone is just a bit
it's a
much.
lot. Like what, seven flavors or
Yeah,
something?
it's like that whole stack, too much, too much. But if you've never had rainbow cone, you almost have to get it just for the experience. Just get a cup to take the rest of it later because you're not going to finish the whole thing.
Yes, love that. Channing, how about you?
Yeah, I mean, you spoke to it a little bit. I think Chicago festival season, I think, can't be beat, especially in the neighborhoods. I'm in Printers Row, so we just had Lollapalooza, which I'm not putting in part of that continuum. But we're having Printers Row Art Fest is coming up soon, and I obviously always, as a book nerd, I love when we have Printers Row Lit Fest every year. So
Yeah, that one is good.
yeah,
Oh, I've never been. I'll have to check that out.
Yeah,
oh,
it's
you got
awesome.
to, you have to, yeah. If you're a book lover, you gotta do it.
Yeah, cool. Okay, add it to my list. All right. We often want to know who's coming to the cookout. But today I'm asking, what are you bringing to the cookout? Is there like a signature dish or item that people could always count on you to bring to the cookout?
I'm not a great cook, admittedly. The only dessert I know how to make is peach cobbler.
Oh,
There's a
only you said it like that was something so basic.
Listen, it's not cute at all. It's not fancy. Canned peaches. It is not what you're thinking. But
Okay.
it's still
All
pretty
right.
good. It's still pretty good.
Yeah, I'm also probably not the creator of, of any of the delicious bites, but I'm certainly indulging in some good ribs. Things I
So what
like.
I hear you all saying is you're bringing the chairs or you're bringing
Yeah,
the
yeah,
speaker.
yeah. Paper towels, extra cups. I got you.
I'm bringing a donation to the food. Yeah.
I love it. Okay, finally, and then we'll get into our more serious questions. If you could invite any Black leader to your dinner table, living or passed on, who would it be?
Oh, that's hard.
I've always been really interested in the connection between arts and arts as a catalyst for civic engagement. So I think
Mm,
I'm going to go back to the late great Harry Belafonte.
mm, I love that.
That's interesting. Somebody who passed not too long ago, Toni Morrison, is one of my favorite
Mhm.
writers. I think she would have a lot to say about current happenings. Oh, that's a good one. Somebody put in the chat, A. Philip
Hey, Philip
Randolph.
Randolph.
Yeah,
Yeah,
his thoughts would be really interesting right now as well.
I love that. All good answers. No wrong answers here. Thank you all for participating in that little fire round. But to get us to today's topic a little closer, I want to open us up with a question about kind of how we came to be in the seats we currently fill. For many of us, our career paths have been more of a winding road, really, than a straight one. So, could you all talk a little bit about your journey to philanthropy? It's interesting because our roads crossed several times, each of you all in that journey. So, I know a little bit about it, but I'd love for everyone to hear more about your stories. Whitney, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So Jessica and I know each other because we were in a college prep program together in high school called Target Hope. And we went on a ton of college tours and got a lot of really good enrichment. We went to school on Saturday, which wasn't popular, but it was a lot of fun. And I used to ask the staff there how things got paid for. This is a really interesting full circle moment for Forefront. And one of the staff pulled out this big foundation directory back when Forefront was Donors Forum. Donors Forum used to publish these big purple and white foundation directories. And one of the staff said, well, we write letters to people in these directories and they send us money. So that was my first introduction to what a program officer was. And I specifically wanted to be a program officer for college access because I was in a college access program. I thought it was awesome. And our parents were only paying about $400 or $500 for us to go on a week-long college tour across the country, stay in really nice hotels. So that was the first time I knew that institutional philanthropy was a career path or a job. But I had a hard time navigating philanthropy as a young person, asking about program officer roles. I didn't know what a program associate or assistant was. And no one told me, like, you're 20, you shouldn't be asking about this, you should be asking about that. So folks would always tell me, like, oh, you won't hear about a program officer job. People don't post those jobs. You have to know somebody, you have to have decades of issue area expertise. So it was challenging for me to get access to philanthropy positions and careers. And at that time, people really didn't post program officer roles, and you did have to know somebody. So I started in recruiting and executive search because I had such a hard time and kept being actively discouraged from pursuing grant making roles. But then I started doing grant making as a volunteer with Chicago Foundation for Women. They're giving councils and circles, and then I just eventually made my way to what I wanted to do. I just refused to take no for an answer. It didn't make a lot of sense for me. And eventually I did meet younger people who had worked in foundations. And so the things people were saying didn't quite add up. And I kept persisting because it was really what I wanted to do. And I think that people who get to make decisions about where funding goes in communities should come from those communities. And I didn't see that enough. And so it was just something that I always wanted to do and knew like I have to make this happen because people keep telling me no, but other people aren't getting this same type of feedback or pushback or gatekeeping, and I need to figure out what that's about.
I love that, Winnie. I mean, that makes me think about Shirley Chisholm, who's somebody I would want to bring to dinner, who always said, if there's not a seat at the table, then bring one, right? So you're like, I'm not giving up. I'm not accepting no. And that speaks volumes. Channing, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think I probably learned about just the notion of organized philanthropy and what a program officer is. I think, around grad school time. But I think, just kind of backing up further. I mean, the Great Recession turned is when I, graduated my undergrad. And so without many options for a political science undergrad, aside from, going to law school, I decided to, began an AmeriCorps journey. So I was grew up in the area, but I went to undergrad out in California. Um, really just witnessing some really just troubling stories making the national news of stories coming out of Chicago. And one in particular that really resonated was the really tragic death of Darren Albert, who was from the Altgeld Gardens development on the far south side. Just a horrific murder and making national news and really caused me to want to do something to support particularly young black men in Chicago. So I noticed that the biggest AmeriCorps program in the state was by far City Year, and that provided opportunities to work closely with young people who are just kind of on the precipice of either being on track or not on track for graduating high school. So, did that a couple years, worked with students in North Lawndale, really started to learn about some of the more intersectional challenges and not having that vocabulary at the time, but the intersectional challenges that our students and their families are facing. So, did that a couple years and really solidified my just overall interest in the nonprofit sector. From there, I transitioned to a small literacy-based nonprofit called Working in the Schools, where I was able to, well, first of all, put my graduate school because I was in AmeriCorps, they sort of subsidized half of the expenses for grad school. So that was a major boost for someone who didn't have necessarily the resources to go to grad school. So I was able to kind of make that pivot from program administration to resource development, which I think was a pretty instrumental shift. Kind of helping me make more strategic decisions for the organization. And obviously I didn't really know much about fundraising careers prior to that. So I think that really just kind of expanded my horizons and understanding what nonprofits have to do on a day-to-day basis. But from there, we also did a merge with an organization that did teacher professional development. So our consultant on the merge happened to be also consulting with Navy Pier. And I hadn't realized that Navy Pier had made a transition to a nonprofit in 2011. So he wanted me to bring me to Navy Pier to sort of support them in their nonprofit public service mission, really trying to become more of a nonprofit cultural district. So I went over there for a couple of years to lead corporate foundation relations and also making, raising money for security infrastructure as well. But I think that that opportunity really just provided a lot more opportunity to expand reach and access to new opportunities. That's where, I got close to Jessica there when I began the Chicago Urban League's Impacts Fellowship. But from there, I made the transition to philanthropy, just given the extensive relationships that I had built with program officers at Polk Brothers Foundation, both or all three of City Year, working in the schools, Navy Pier, all have been pretty substantial Polk Brothers Foundation grantees. So with Polk Brothers, it's really just knowing the work and the missions of those organizations and knowing my personal involvement in them, that really helped sort of create the credibility for them to want to bring me on at the time as a generalist, working in what was then our strong communities portfolio. So, housing and homelessness, workforce and economic development, legal services, public safety, gun violence prevention. So that really helped get me to the place I'm in right now, and we're ready to sort of implement our new strategic plan just next month.
Oh, that's exciting. And you touched on perfect segue, kind of that intersection between organizational missions and like personal service and interests. So I want to segue a bit to Whitney, and you mentioned it as well, speaking a bit about your journey, the Southside Giving Circles and the Chicago Foundation for Women. Tell us more about the work you did with the Giving Circle and how that work, that service, that dedication impacted the Chicago Foundation for Women.
Oh, sure. So again, I was asking about how to get involved with grant making when I was a young person coming out of undergrad and going to the Brown School of Social Work at WashU. Jessica and I were also in that program together. The United Way in St. Louis has some similar grant making panels where you can join and help with their renewal grants each year in different issue areas. So I had done that in grad school while I was still in St. Louis. And when I came back home, I was asking about ways to get involved with grant making in a volunteer capacity. And someone introduced me to the program officer that was working with all of the giving councils and circles at Chicago Foundation for Women. They have six now. I think they had up to eight at one time. And so I joined the Women United Giving Council, which was one they used to have for women of color in general. And so that was a really cool introduction to the mechanics of grant making. There are people who get together, pool their own resources, set membership fees, and they make recommendations on grants to different organizations based on whatever the priorities are. So they have some geographic based circles and they have some affinity based circles. I helped start the Southside Giving Circle at Chicago Foundation for Women. So they support small organizations that are on the South Side, mostly led by Black women. There's also a West Side Giving Circle. There is a North Shore. I think they've changed their name recently. There's a Western Suburbs, and then there's also an LBTQ and a Young Women's. So that was a great way to meet other people who were involved in helping support small organizations that don't get a lot of access to large institutional funding. CFW is the first foundation funder for a lot of organizations in Chicago that usually don't get support from larger foundations, either because they're too new, or too small. So that was a really great introduction to understanding how philanthropy works as a professional field, who has access to it, who doesn't, why, and just how different foundations are, things that I didn't know or understand as a young person, just asking about philanthropy careers. And so CFW was a really awesome opportunity for me to get to know people and get to understand how philanthropy works and how foundations work. They still do have a program officer that kind of coordinates all of the giving across the councils and circles. And it's grown in popularity nationally, giving circles more broadly. And there's an organization called Philanthropy United, I want to say, that has a directory so that you can see where all the councils and circles are. And someone's just started a circle down in Florida. There's a lady who's a preservationist and historian. She's just started a giving circle for preserving Black history. So almost anyone can do this, either starting their own 501(c)(3) or getting most people use community foundations like CFW to be their sponsor. But I've had a great experience being involved with that type of work. It develops leadership for people who are on the circle to lead, co-chair, committees and things like that. And there are also leadership opportunities for the grantees that you're supporting. It gives them access to CFW's broader grant making pool. So it also serves to help introduce the foundation to organizations it hasn't heard of. Because again, usually these are folks pooling their own dollars and making recommendations more than likely to organizations that they know in their own communities and neighborhoods.
Mhm. Yeah, I mean, there are a lot of people probably on today's call and folks who may watch this recording who are part of small shops, small organizations, or smaller development teams. And so, is there any advice you could offer folks who may be thinking, Giving Circle sounds like something we might want to do? How do they even go about exploring that as an avenue?
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I would check out Philanthropy United's directory and see if there's a circle that exists that is supporting the types of organizations you're interested in. And I would suggest reaching out to anybody at CFW to learn about how theirs are structured. If you are interested in starting one, learn about how they're structured and what you might need to do. The Chicago Community Trust also hosts several of them there, so they have different ones. Some of the similar affinity breakdowns, there's African American Legacy, there's one for Latina folks there. I think they have the Asian Giving Circle at the trust as well, and they have two staff people who help with those. So I would suggest reaching out to somebody either at CFW or the trust to learn more about what to do if you're interested in going the sponsor route as opposed to starting an organization from scratch. It makes much more sense to have a sponsor for a lot of that back office and administrative support, so that you're not, starting a whole organization if you don't need to do that necessarily for grant making.
Mhm. That's a great point. Channing, I'm turning to you now. A two-part question. You mentioned we did Impact together, 5E Forever. We
That's right.
also did the AFP Fellowship, not at the same time, but I think 2 years apart or a year apart or something like
Something like
that.
that.
So
Yeah.
some similar like professional development experiences. And you recently completed Leadership Greater Chicago, so congrats on that as well. um, you know, as organizational leaders, and again, people in small shops or in small organizations, you're often trying to juggle between your current workload and priorities and exploring other avenues like those types of leadership programs. So, just I'm kind of curious about how you navigated, your full-time responsibilities against the demands of the program and how those experiences really shaped your work and your service as you move through your career.
Yeah, and I'll get into that in a second. But I also just want to give a plug. Thank you, Whitney, for pointing out the African American Legacy Fund. I'll be happy to talk to anybody about that. I'm on the advisory board for that organization, which is doing really great work around Black-led community wealth building and arts and culture and a lot of other really great initiatives. But no, yeah, I think in terms of professional development, I think that Impact and LGC have both been sort of transformative in my sort of professional life in very different ways. They're very different types of programs. And what I love about Impact is you show up and it's an unapologetically Black program. It's for sort of a cross sector of Black professionals who are just doing their best to make a difference. And transformation really in Black Chicago through really experts in the field, historical context, and also just elite university partner. I believe when Jessica, you and I did it, it was Booth, and I think they've transitioned now to actually Harvard. I think alums of that program now get a Harvard certificate in nonprofit management or I think some sort of Harvard certificate. Um, but I think that Impact in terms of the role that it had in my life, I think it really helped me. It was an earlier stage. Obviously, this was 7 years ago we completed. So it really just helped me learn how to operate and thrive, hopefully, in a variety of environments that I know that weren't inherently built for me or for people that look like us. And I think it really gave me the confidence that I belonged in most of the rooms that I entered, and it really helped me. Really make that career transition. I made the pivot from Navy Pier to Polk Brothers Foundation during my time at Impact, and I think it was the strength and support of that Impact community that really gave me that confidence. And I still obviously keep in touch with my Impact classmates like you, Jessica. I'm part of a all Black men's book club called the Visible Man Review that was started by one of our classmates, Alex Breland. So I think that that's for folks interested in different professional development opportunities and who identify as Black. I think it's a fantastic option. LGC, on the other hand, it's a little bit more of sort of an immersive experience, and so rather than sort of um, gathering folks around their shared experience of being a Black professional in Chicago, you get all sorts of sort of walks of life and people who are just really interested in sort of becoming, increasingly influential in Chicago's civic community and really finding where those points of alignment are and identifying shared priorities. So one of the things that I sort of set out for myself in joining LGC is I'm going to be around some of these bankers and I'm going to be around all kinds of executives and government officials that may not necessarily I feel like I have common cause with and sort of introducing them to the really incredible work happening in our neighborhoods. For instance, we all get assigned sort of a community engagement subgroup. So there's like six of us from the class that go learn about what's happening in particular communities. And I was sort of the lead for the Englewood Community Engagement Group. And I was able to bring groups of folks to the Peace Campus in West Englewood. So introducing them to organizations like Teamwork Englewood and Imagine Englewood If and Grow Greater Englewood and Growing Home. Um, Really just understanding the heroic work that's happening in the nonprofit sector and how they're really making magic happen on resources that they should be getting a lot more of. And so one of my big sort of missions from the LGC experience is creating a donor advised fund. So we actually started the first ever cohort sponsor donor advised fund at the Chicago Community Trust to sort of grow resources and continue to engage in collective giving with the hope that obviously our class will be able to do some good individually, but we're hoping that other classes and other types of organizations similarly just engaged in setting up a DAF because I think it's a great opportunity to bring folks together. You also asked about sort of navigating full-time responsibilities. I think it really just comes down to your employer and your employer being 100% on board. Otherwise, you won't get the most out of your experience. So I think that that's sort of one of the things I look for when I look for, places I'm working is my supervisors, my leadership going to be 100% supportive of my professional development, both in terms of time that I'll need to dedicate to the program and in terms of, money in terms of sponsorship. So I think that's just a key component of growth in this sector.
That's awesome. I didn't know about the DAF. That's congratulations on that. That's really cool. Just a way to make a lasting impact and something I hadn't thought about before within our fellowship structures. That's cool. Whitney, anything you would like to add to that? I know you completed, equally notable fellowships with the Association of Black Foundation Executives, Chicago United for Equity. Um, what was your experience like?
Sure. I did the ABFE fellowship a couple years ago in 2021, 22, which was cool for me because I was looking for a way to build my national network. I'm from Chicago. I've lived here most of my life. I used to be a recruiter, so I feel like I know a lot of people because I've had to, but mostly in Chicago. So I didn't feel like I had a strong network outside of Chicago. And so I did the ABFE fellowship to get connected to other folks in philanthropy across the country. And it was really useful for that. And we're still in touch to this day. And I still attend ABFE conferences pretty regularly to connect with people and see people in person. So that one was a good one for me. And part of the experience included executive coaching. So I've talked to several people who've done a lot of fellowships, and one of the things they typically find most useful is if there is an executive coaching component, which I think for a lot of fellowship opportunities there are. And so that was really great just to problem solve in real time about things going on at your organization. Think about career development, where you kind of see yourself in the sector, what you're looking for, what kind of leader you want to be. And so for that one, ABFE in particular is a lot about thinking about your legacy and what you want to leave behind in the sector. So I really enjoyed that one, and I've heard good things similarly about the Impact program, and Hispanics in Philanthropy also has a fellowship program that I've heard is really strong too. So it just depends on what you're looking for in those types of things. Some of them have some sort of project or capstone component. Chicago United for Equity has a project component where you're supposed to design some sort of project and possibly present it in like a poster style type of thing. Some of the other ones you might get some sort of degree or certificate as part of it. So I feel like Chicago has a lot of opportunities. When I meet people at conferences that are from smaller cities, they do not have the type of ecosystem that we have in philanthropy, which is also a really interesting thing to put into perspective, the types of access that we have here, the people we're connected to, people we see all the time, people we're in meetings with all the time. And so talking to people who are fundraising and grant seeking, hearing the challenges that they have in this city is really interesting considering how many folks we do have here that think they're accessible and think that they're reachable in comparison to smaller towns and smaller cities that don't have nearly as many foundations to reach out to for support, and you really do have to have closer relationships to people. So it's just something I think about often is how to be available to people and accessible to people who are trying to figure out institutional philanthropy for whatever reason, for if they're interested in a career or a job, or if they're raising money for their organization, just so people know what's going on and who to talk to and how all of this stuff works, because some of it can be very just nebulous, unclear, no straight path. People don't know who things are for or who the audience is. So I found fellowship opportunities to be really helpful for me in thinking about broadening my network and continuing to have access to people and creating access for other people who are looking to reach us.
Yeah, access is such a great point you make because we are a big city. We we often say Chicago, but when we really think about Chicagoland area, right, it's huge. And I feel like we often joke about like, oh yeah, it's probably like 1 or 2 degrees of separation, but the separation doesn't equal access, right? So even if you're closer and making a connection doesn't mean you'll have the access. And so figuring out how to navigate, the connection points or how to deepen, right, the connection points is so important and it makes a difference. To your point, I think about our St. Louis days, which St. Louis feels big city internally, but really is more, a
Small
southern,
town.
right,
Yep.
small town, and so the connections look and feel differently than a Chicago.
Yep. And people I talk to, because I grew up here, I think my perspective is different. People who you talk to who are transplants here, I've talked to so many people who say they have a hard time socially in Chicago because we're so clicked up. I've heard that from multiple people.
Mhm.
So do with that what you will. But
What high school you go to? Yeah.
exactly, yeah, I think
Exactly.
because there's more because it's a bigger city, but it still feels insular and exclusive if you're coming from another place
Yeah.
and you're trying to meet people or get connected to people. If folks have been friends since elementary school and high school and went to the same university, it feels,
Mhm.
we can feel closed off to other people who are not from here or didn't grow up here, and the way we ask questions to find out the 1 or 2 degrees of separation, it makes
Mhm.
people feel like we're trying to say they don't belong. When that's how we build connections and get to know each other. But to other people, it sounds like we're doing a lot of name dropping, even if that's not what we're trying to do. So I have
Mhm.
heard people say that, access and building community can be hard here because we are often so close to each other. So it can feel like a big small town.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, totally. And I'd like to think that some of these programs and experiences that we've been talking about today help build those bridges, help kind of not totally level the playing field, right? Because some would argue probably that equally um, access to such programs could also be tricky, right? Because if you don't know all the right people or have the right supports. And so I hope just kind of this platform and the work we do through Five Club and others kind of helps folks think about who they have connections to or how we can make sure we're being as equitable as possible, even in our own, endeavors to excellence and development and growth. But
I mean, I'd love to unpack that just a little bit. I mean, I'm just
yeah.
thinking, I think that that sort of that provincialism It's sort of, it's a result of sort of structural racism and redlining, and the fact that Chicago's the most segregated big city in this country. So I think that us trying to build connections, or Black Chicago trying to build sort of connections is more of a defense mechanism. But obviously we have to balance that with bringing new folks in the fold as well.
Yeah, I think so. And I think Forefront is a good example of the type of organization that's for everybody. Folks who are on the grant making side and the grant seeking side, you will also experience in this sector folks assuming that things are only for grant makers or only for program officers, and they're not. So I think Forefront does a really good job of having so many types of communities and opportunities and events because it is a regional association, so it does better at statewide work and those sorts of things so that people know this is our nonprofit association for anybody, not just for foundations or for nonprofits. And I think there are other spaces that don't do as good of a job making that clear that everybody can participate. Um, which is that's a reflection of philanthropy more broadly being kind of closed off and seen as kind of exclusionary, and it's hard to access people. So I think that's really what that's about. Philanthropy has issues with that and with perpetuating some of these power dynamics where grant makers aren't as accessible for different reasons. And I think Forefront does a great job at kind of breaking that down so that people can talk to each other and meet each other and learn more about the work everybody's doing.
Mhm, mhm. It hit the nail on the head. I mean, our June session was around humanizing foundations, getting to just that very thing, right? How do we see again just the people in each other? And yes, we have wear certain hats and sit in certain seats, but we have a shared human experience, right? And kind of a nice segue. We had in July a session about boards, and we
Mm.
spent a lot of time talking about boards. I'm sure you all hear a lot of conversations about boards, and the reality is there isn't a seat for everybody at the board, and those take time and different things. And so, what other ways, right? It's kind of how this conversation got sparked. What other ways can people impact organizations and make difference in communities, other than just being tapped or seeking. A lot of people are seeking board seats, and so that's why we wanted to have this conversation today. And so along those lines, I know you all get hit up for a lot of requests, to lead, to support, to give, to serve in one capacity or another. What are some do's and don'ts you would offer our listeners, our audience here, when it comes to being approached about, sharing of your time, talents, ties, all the things? Channing, why don't we start with you?
Yeah, sure. I think I try to be, generally pretty available and accessible. And I admit this the past year it's been just really tough in the midst, and it's really the thick of strategic planning. As I mentioned, we'll be sort of launching our full strategy in the next month and opening up the grant portal for all to apply. And we did a few sort of test RFPs this year. So just sort of that just time to sit and work at my desk has been hard to come by. So it's been really harder to just take just can we just catch up calls and things like that. And so that's been just really tough. But I think as far as the dues, I think the biggest one is just to do some just demonstrate that you've just taken a look at sort of what we've put out. Whether that's news updates, whether that's just information, if you're just trying to get to know us, like information on the website, like if you want to ask me about participatory action research, which we'll be, doing a lot more of, I'm happy to sort of give you some color on what we, what we say when we mean that and things like that. Um, but just find a way to articulate that there's some synergy between the work that you're trying to advance and the work that we're trying to advance on the grant making side. I think one of my bigger frustrations, and I am qualifying that this doesn't happen very often. It's just when individuals come to be with me and just really haven't demonstrated that they've done any sort of basic research into what some of the current priorities that we have at the foundation. So I think my biggest advice for requests for any program officer is just to demonstrate that you've done some homework. And I think the conversation should be more about kind of follow up to the information that's already out there.
Whitney, any thoughts there?
Yeah, that's interesting. I'm on the board of one organization, Emerging Practitioners in Philanthropy, EPIP for short. I don't get asked a lot around board opportunities, although I do think people who are looking for board members would do better to ask folks that they wouldn't normally consider asking. And I think most of my grantees would probably be great board members, especially those who are running organizations. I think executive directors of nonprofits would be excellent board members, but they're short on time. So, but I think people are incentivized to ask folks who they believe have more access to dollars, and that may not necessarily be true just because they're on the corporate side. So I think people would be better to ask nonprofit professionals about board service. But in general, I would say I do get a lot of requests for just meetings and people who are trying to learn about inroads to a foundation. At CFW, I had a lot more time to be accessible and take those calls and was happy to do so. Mostly talking to, again, really small organizations that have not yet received any foundation funding and are just trying to figure out what do program officers do? Who am I talking to? What should I be asking? What do I need to learn about? Okay, so now what about people who work at corporations? What are their job titles? How do I get access to those folks? So those conversations were a lot different. At the MacArthur Foundation, I get 10 times more requests for meetings. I'm not exaggerating. And a lot of it has to do with we don't have any more staff contact information on the website. So if you don't already know who at MacArthur works in what program or issue area, a lot of people are just trying to figure out the right person to talk to. So it's not that difficult for me to take some of those calls. It's just that I don't have the capacity to take as many of them anymore. So that's harder, but I do still try to be accessible to people because I know usually they're just trying to figure out who's the right person to talk to, who works in this program area, is this person still over here? So that is tough because the requests are so frequent and so many, and I don't always have a direct connection to folks who are reaching out. So I would say at least try to find some sort of connection to somebody you know at some of these institutions. If you have questions or somebody that you're trying to get access to, ask for an introduction. And then usually, if people are asking me for introductions, I always reach out to the person and ask if it's okay first. So, for example, Polk Brothers just did a strategy refresh. If I meet someone and they say, "Hey, I'd really like to meet Channing over at Polk Brothers," I'd probably send Channing an email first and say, "Hey, is it okay for me to introduce you to this organization? Because they've just done a strategy refresh. I don't know if they still have an opportunity that would even align, so you can't set other folks up for meetings that they don't have the capacity to take, or if there's no alignment there. So typically it can feel like people are giving you the runaround, but they might just be trying to figure out the right person to introduce you to at the right time so that you're not continuing to try and get in touch with people and they pass you off to somebody else. We know it's annoying just as much as organizations who are seeking funding. So we do our best, but again, it doesn't always work out or lead somewhere. I have had a couple success stories where I've introduced someone to someone else and it actually resulted in a grant, and it still took over a year to make that happen. So it takes a lot, but I try to be accessible to people and at least letting them know, hey, this is what's happening, or no, I don't think it makes sense. Here's the type of things they're usually looking for or interested in. Here's a better person you might want to reach out to, things like that. But not everybody has the time or capacity to do that.
Mhm.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, one of the things my former boss at Cardona always would say is, one foundation, one foundation. I think that, we are going to have, and we did this with the LOIs as well, sort of a two-phase process where it's like hopefully a pretty light lift LOI and then a full proposal. And like we will we will read the LOIs and we will assess them. I think and I just get that it's such a such a difficult time for the sector right now with the extreme austerity from the federal government and what have you. But I think that I think some of those meetings, I think folks are looking for assurances like we're good, right? And that type of thing. And we're not able to really provide that type of comfort. So I think it makes things really tricky, and it sort of creates some discomfort.
Mhm, mhm. Yeah, you all are making me think of, you know, this conversation is a little bit more around like the funding, being approached for funding or that kind of opportunity. But I'm also hearing in there when we think outside of the box, right? Where you may say, okay, yeah, I know Channing and his organization recently went through a strategic planning process. I may be, XYZ person at said organization who needs to do a strategic plan. And the conversation may be, oh, maybe I could, maybe he doesn't have capacity, but maybe I could tap Channing, for example, just to talk about, hey, can I just like thought partner with you about the strategic planning that I would like to, take on, or I need, some help kind of walking my org through the next steps, right? And so that's part of what I encourage folks to think about too. Sometimes we know the board, how to go after for board opportunities or for funding, and sometimes we forget when we're trying to navigate some of those other spaces that we could thought partner, or even Whitney, I love your example of like, oh, I may hear of a grantee who maybe aligned to what Channing's doing, but let me check with Channing first, not just assume that I can make the connection, right? Those are the kinds of things I think are so helpful as we think about, where we may be under leveraging our networks or ways in which we can get back to what we talked about, strengthen connection and access. So,
That's what it
uh,
makes me think of the old.
oh
There's an
yeah,
old,
no, go
there's,
ahead.
there's an old adage that if you ask for money, you get advice. You ask for advice, you get money. That makes sense.
That's funny.
That's funny. And I'm pretty sure Liz mentioned that as well in her session, which is also full circle to this whole kitchen cabinet, kitchen table concept. But in the interest of time, I do want to give our virtual audience here a chance to ask any questions. Kate, do we have anything in the chat, or would anybody like to uh, come off mute and ask any questions at this time?
Had some chatter in the chat, but I don't.
Chatter. We love chatter.
If anyone also, I always offer this no matter the subject, but if anybody wants to ask a question anonymously, you can also directly message me and I will ask for a friend.
Love that. Great option.
Okay, Channing made a good point in the chat. There is the AbbVie conference is coming to Chicago next year.
Mm-hmm.
I also just found out that Grant Makers in Health is going to be in Chicago next year as well. If
Mm-hmm.
anybody is interested in that, I haven't been to that one, but I have a friend who just went there this year in Boston, and they're coming to Chicago next year as well.
Love that.
Is there a space for another spoken question?
Yes.
Hey,
Yeah,
Maureen.
Hi,
hey
Maureen.
there. Hey there. Do you see some familiar faces here? My name is Maureen Stavley. I'm with Illinois. And I'd like to return actually to a question that Jessica asked that I think the answers went in a slightly different direction. But it was about recruiting people to serve on boards or in a volunteer capacity, and how like you all, I imagine, Channing and Whitney is as superstars in your various sectors. Like you get approached a lot with these things. How do you decide, apart aside from your regular 9 to 5, like where it's best to direct your efforts, and what are like some approaches that have worked with you and some that haven't from other people presenting these kind of opportunities?
Oh, yeah, I understand your
Yeah,
question.
yeah.
Mostly about capacity for me.
Mm.
I have twins that just turned 3.
Oh, congratulations.
I just got bit last night,
Yeah,
so things between the hours of 4 and 8 are really difficult in my life right now.
yeah.
So I have to think about what time the meetings are, how many meetings there are. I will
Mhm.
join a committee or working group of some sort, that meets quarterly or maybe even once a month if it's something I'm really, really interested in, personal interest or professional interest. And also think about if there is some alignment with my day job. or like what resources or access I might have. We've got office space, I can offer meeting space, those sorts of things. So I try and think about how could I help in other ways if I'm not going to be available for all the meetings or if they meet in the evening and I can't really do that. So mostly it's about time and capacity for me.
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And I'm thinking about like my four main sort of volunteer responsibilities right now. And it is kind of case by case, and I can just go through them quickly. So I'm on the Injustice Watch board as of this year. I think both because I think the court system in Chicago and Cook County just has such an outsized impact on individuals' lives. On top of the fact that Polk Brothers Foundation is increasingly investing in local journalism, on top of the fact that journalism as a sector is in decline and it's essential, obviously, to our democracy. I think about serving as I mentioned, the African American Legacy Fund. I think because sort of this quote unquote race-based grant making and illegal DEI has entered sort of the American lexicon and discourse. I think as an effort to sort of combat that in my small way. I'm on the board of co-chair Lift Chicago, which supports low-income mostly mothers, and I'm sort of the product of a single mom. I understand the sort of what single moms go through. So I think that the cash and coaching model that they do really resonates with me on top of being a Both Brothers Foundation grantee. And then I've for the last almost 10 years, I've been on the committee, the awards committee for the AFP's annual philanthropy awards. And as Jessica mentioned, AFP played a pretty big role in my career very early on. So that's kind of my way of both giving back to AFP and also supporting really great individuals doing work in the sector. So I think it's kind of case by case. There's a couple different factors that go to it.
Channing's busy.
You both are busy. My goodness.
I have a question.
Yes. Let's do
I'm wondering for Channing and Whitney, do you feel like you are still breaking ceilings in your career, or has it gotten to a place where you feel like your voices are really heard in the at the table? We're talking about a table. Are you, as African Americans, do you feel like your voices are really heard, or are there still places and platforms that more breakthrough is needed?
That's a big question.
It really is.
To Channing's earlier point, Chicago is extremely segregated. So I think there are always going to be ceilings. Anytime we're still celebrating the first Black person to do this, the first Black person to do that, and there's no conversation about what policies or systems made that happen, we're not holding anybody accountable who creates those situations. And that makes you think there's something wrong with us. So if we still haven't figured out how to talk about why that was, we're not yet at a point where we're willing to accept some of these things are a problem and some of the environments that we're in are a problem, and that they were not set up for us to be there at all, let alone succeed. So there will always be ceilings, I think. Whether or not you feel heard is situation by situation. It can be on your team, in your organization, in a volunteer capacity, on a broader scale. So there are environments I've been in where I feel very affirmed and very heard. Others less so, but it's also my choice on whether or not I want to push to make sure I feel heard. And that for Black people, it depends on how much energy you have that day. If you want to fight something or make a case for something or point out like, hey, this isn't really the way this is supposed to go. So I think it's a nuanced answer and a yes but or a yes and type of situation. But absolutely, I mean, I think I'm still the labels of like early and mid-career are very confusing to me. I got my first job when I was 15, and I'll probably be working till I'm 85, honestly. So if I'm almost 40 this year, I don't know where mid-career is. Technically, I'm still early career if I plan on working for a long time, so I don't really know what that means anymore. But yeah, I definitely don't think that there are as many spaces without ceilings. I'll put it that way. Ceilings still exist for us in a lot of different ways.
Yeah, I agree with everything Whitney said, and Stacey, really just appreciate that question. It's so important, and as I reflected on it, I think um, Whitney and I probably entered this sector. It is so nuanced because I think that we got to a point. I mean, I got the poke in 2019. Of course, we know what happens in 2020, and it really just seems like we've reached. Before I even go there, like I think that a lot of credit is due to the incredible people whose shoulders Whitney and I are able to stand on. I think of folks like Sharon Bush and Deborah Bennett, and just Deborah Harrington. There's so many individuals who have like, really paved the way. I've heard about what philanthropy was like in the 90s and before, and how um, I think microaggressions probably isn't even the right word as far as like toxic microaggressions or something to the effect. So I think there's a lot of individuals who have really paved the way to make this sector more sort of inclusive of what the city looks like. But it's really this past year especially, I think having to defend things we never thought we had to defend anymore after thinking that in 20 post 2020 and post uprisings, George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, we've sort of reached a turning point in our understanding of systemic racism. And so I've been having to have some certain conversations that I never thought I would have to have anymore. And it seems like we're playing a lot of defense when we could be moving transformation things forward. So it's interesting. So I think it sort of underscores that it's a constant sort of struggle to keep progress moving forward.
Wow, that was an excellent question. And if there are no others, I'll give just a brief pause. But certainly the work continues. We march forward. I'm so grateful to everyone who joined today, to Whitney and Channing. You all are definitely trailblazers in this work, in this world, and I am honored to know you both, and I will support you always. We will continue these conversations. We will continue making the connections, bringing chairs to the table where there are no spaces, breaking those ceilings where they still exist, being the voice when we feel like it, because that's a great point, Whitney. Some days we just don't have the fight in us, especially if you got bit the night before by your own children. There's so much life happening around us, and it's nice to be anchored in the togetherness that we share. So again, just thank you both for your time and for your wisdom and for the work you do in the field. It's truly invaluable. Thank you everyone for being in this virtual space, and to everyone who may have watched this at some point. Thank you for listening. I want to give a quick plug to our September session. Our very own Kate Spellman will be moderating our September 1st session about beyond donations, exploring fee-for-service models. So same time, same channel on September 1st. So thank you all again. Wishing everyone a wonderful day. Enjoy the last of these summertime shy days, because I feel like fall is trying to creep in on us.
Around the corner, yeah.
But yes, thank you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks,
Okay, everybody.
y'all.
Thank you. Have a great day.